Does anyone believe that tech platforms are impartial anymore?
I don't see how you could. I don't think they make any pretense to impartiality anymore either, especially when the partiality is baked into the terms and conditions. Twitter being the best example of you can't misgender someone. It's like, sorry, there is only one ideology probably in all of human history that has made a big deal about gender identity and gender expression in the way that the left is now. We all know what ideology this is: intersectionality, and it's very obvious that this is therefore an intersectional domain if you can actually lose your account. I mean, like I've had friends who have been suspended for calling people dude, which I consider to be a fairly gender neutral, an informal gender neutral way of referring to a person. And it's also sort of part of a how to describe it, like a sort of informal social pattern of behavior where if you call someone dude, you realize that you're setting the context for the interaction. It's like, if I say, hey mate, I don't expect you to call me sir or be formal or say, Mr. this or whatever. And you realize that we're having a friendly conversation that has goodwill behind it. It implies a kind of goodwill when I enter into the conversation. And so like, in my world, in the social spheres I exist in, calling someone dude isn't me saying you're a man. Whereas in the sort of, I guess, San Francisco, Californian left-wing view of things, actually, oh my goodness, you've just misgendered. This is a high crime against Twitter's terms of service. You must be banned.
It's always the worst possible implication, like the worst possible way that I
interpretation.
Interpretation. Sorry.
There definitely is an element of that, but I also think there's a kind of dogmatic view of certain words, like the F word, right, that we can't say anymore. Now, I grew up watching South Park, and from watching South Park, I actually had not connected really that word to homosexuality. I connected that word to a kind of insufferable childish behavior, which is not, in my opinion, limited to people who are gay. And so I didn't consider it to be a particularly bad word, but it's now been, I guess, reclaimed by the LGBT lobby, the sort of activist lobby, and stigmatized. So now that word is actually a very bad word. That's the equivalent of like the N-word and things like this. It's, oh God, now we've actually, from a word being actually relatively benign and not trivial, has become something again you can get banned or suspended from these platforms. It's like, wow, that's interesting. Weaponizing words that had otherwise lost their power, I would have thought was the opposite of the direction that the progressives would want to go in. But I suppose it does give them a useful tool with which to sort of browbeat and harry the wrong thinkers. So
I've been trying to think about why social media always seems to throttle people like Steven Crowder, like right instead of left. And I get it that, like, in the eyes of big corporations, that the left wing's associated with compassion and virtue, and the right's associated with intolerance and bigotry, even if that may sometimes seem like it's actually being flipped on its head. But I can't work out if that explains it all. Like, is there an element that because conservatives, especially in America, they tend to play quite fast and loose with claims in a way which is more easily disputed? So the crazier claims of the left seem to be more esoteric and unfalsifiable, whereas the crazier claims of the right seem to be at least rooted in reality, even if they're unhinged.
Can we think of an example of each of those, just so
So when we're talking about semantic overload, when people are playing around with what words mean, with all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter, for instance, but for people on the right, it would be to do with perhaps the way that workers are being moved out of jobs, about stats to do with immigration. They may be inflated and they may be wrongly cited, but at least they're falsifiable.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. The one. So the way that I think about it, and from the way you've just laid that out, is the fact that the left, the academic left at the moment, seems to be essentially rooted in semantics games, the redefinition of words, in fact. And the right, in my experience, and I'm not saying this is exclusive or anything, actually tends to just use the common English language definitions of words. And this is why it's actually quite a pleasure to read someone like Thomas Sowell, right? Because he just lays out, he never has to redefine a word because he just uses it in the common English parlance, because he's not trying to be a pretentious academic about it. He's trying to just lay out, look, this is the data. This is my interpretation of said data in a common sense, straightforward manner. Do you find this persuasive? And it turns out that actually millions of people find this persuasive. Whereas the left have to come up with very, as you said, esoteric ways of looking at things. And actually, well, let me tell you what the real definition of a woman is. Let me tell you what the real definition of patriarchy is. Let me tell you about the real, and it's what, hang on a second. I didn't agree to any of these real definite redefinitions, and I don't agree to the definition you finally come out with. The classic example being, of course, the definition of a woman. For a right winger, I guess, which means essentially just someone who isn't politicized into the culture war, a woman in the dictionary is an adult human female, which is a good and sensible definition. It's got particular limits, it has essential characteristics, and it's not self-referential. So you're not going around in a circle when you're trying to define it. So it makes sense. You don't need to actually think about that any further, really, and that's probably why it's the basic definition. Whereas the left's version is a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, which is actually a really concerning definition, isn't it? Because you realize, well, hang on a second, you haven't defined the word. A woman is anyone who identifies as. A woman is anyone who identifies as. A woman is anyone who identifies as. And so you've got this recurring loop in the definition of the word. And so the sentence is never actually completed. So we don't have a definition there anyway. Obviously, being self-referential, it gives us no information on what a woman actually is, other than some kind of being that identifies as this empty word, this word that has yet to be given any content. And also the weird thing about it, and I've been thinking about this a lot, because like what the important thing about definitions is also what's excluded from the definition, not just what's included. Because if you take out the term adult from the definition woman, then what you're saying is that non-adults and maybe even non-humans, if you take out the human part, could identify as women. And that's really weird, isn't it? Because I've actually had a child come up to me when I was doing my Southwest MEP tour. I actually had like a 12-year-old girl come up to me and say something like, I'm a woman, don't oppress me, because I'm a feminist or something. And it was really weird, because it's like, look, you're actually not a woman, you're a child, you're not a woman. So why has this child decided that they can come up to me and act like they're some sort of moral authority on the subject of what being a woman is, since they haven't got to the stage in life that is womanhood anyway? And the implications of taking out the requirement of it being an adult is actually kind of worrying, and probably something that should be put back in. So, I mean, even if you were going to be an intersectionalist about it, you could be like, okay, a woman is any adult who identifies as a woman, would be a perfectly acceptable. No, it wouldn't be acceptable, but it would be a better step up than just having it as completely open, because I mean, it opens up the possibility. If we could somehow show that this pig identified as a woman, would we be justified in treating it as a woman, and how would we justify not treating it as a woman, So it obviously, I don't think that we'll be able to show that, but the possibilities are strange and silly, and it's because we've moved away from the essential characteristics. And I think you end up in this kind of hollow world, because there was a UN Women's conference upon which this a disabled black speaker woman, lady, female. I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to characterize her, but she said that a woman is something like shapeless and formless and timeless and eternal. It's like, this is sounding like an elder god from Cthulhu, like a shapeless, formless, timeless entity. It's like, well, what the hell is the use of the term woman anymore? Why would anyone want to transition to become a woman or identify as a woman if there's no form or shape or definition to it? What was the point of this?
Yeah.
And so this gives strength to the turf argument that actually they're trying to obliterate the term woman, and this will damage women's rights. Because obviously, if you can't define what a woman is and identify a woman from anything else, how can you have women's rights? And they've got a point.
So that's a very slippery game, playing around with semantics and semantic overload. And I think that what Crowder does when he does make his arguments are at least rooted in things that can be falsified and that people can complain about.
Yes.
Whereas with that, it's always just a game of trying to catch this incredibly slippery eel. And as soon as you get anywhere close to it, it changes form into smoke and Cthulhu and pisses off.
That's exactly how I feel about it, and that's why, unfortunately, a lot of modern discourse has come down to games of semantics, which is actually terribly tiresome if you think about it, because it doesn't advance anything. It ends up meaning you get kind of bogged down in incredibly pedantic conversations. But unfortunately, I guess that if this is the current ideological and philosophical trend that swept the West, we've got to engage with it as it is, right?